information that is being propagated through our media today. One of those things, which has been the subject or the topic of many discussions in mainstream media right now, is replacement theory, which has been taught and touted by Tucker Carlson on Fox News every other Thursday. So check out Abby's take on how this connects to the manifesto of the latest mass shooting that we saw, and why we have to know more about what exactly replacement theory is and what it means.
I'm going to explain the Great Replacement conspiracy theory that fueled the racist terrorist attack in Buffalo this weekend. So, heads up. We have a tendency of simplifying terrorism, especially racially motivated terrorism, as just a single individual acting out of hate. But that's not really the full picture. Terrorism is a political strategy. It aims to create change. The Great Replacement is a conspiracy theory that essentially claims that non-white people are replacing white people in Western countries. The myth usually centers immigration, birth rates, and sometimes anti-Semitic conspiracy theories that the Jews are behind all of it. It originated in Europe and was primarily concerned with Muslim immigration. In the US, it's often focused on Latin American immigrants, but at its heart, replacement theory is about white supremacy. Since we've historically viewed power as a zero-sum game, when white people see non-white people gain power, they feel like it's taking something away from them. So when they aren't given all of the power and wealth that they feel entitled to, they have to either change their worldview or find someone to blame. Conspiracy theories are great tools for blaming other people. To scapegoat their problems, there are two directions they can go in. Hold on, I made a diagram. Perceived upwards, these are groups and institutions that they view as having more power than them, so like elites, Soros, Gates, the UN. And perceived downwards, these are groups that they view as having less power than them, so like black people, Muslims, immigrants, queer people, etc. The exception to this is Schrodinger's Jew, who is somehow inferior to all other races, but simultaneously able to control the entire world. Great Replacement theory is a white response to non-white people gaining power in society. It wraps all of these things together to create this victim mentality for white people, a narrative in which they feel so threatened that they will resort to terrorism. The Buffalo shooting isn't a singular act of hate. It is part of a systemic strategy to enforce white supremacy.
Okay, now I would argue, after seeing that video, I just want to talk about it real quick, dude.
All right.
Because replacement theory is something that I have heard about ever since I was a child, when I first started going to school. And I was told that the Mexican population, or the Mexican American population, would be a majority in this country by now. Mm-hmm. That was when I was in grade school. And as I grew, the same kind of fear-mongering type of rhetoric would pop up in the news almost around the same time as the census data would come out.
Yep.
And they would say, alert, alert, Mexicans will become the majority, or people of color will become the majority in America. And they would kick the can down the road a little bit further, because the time that they had said that we would be a majority had come and passed.
Exactly.
But let me just spoiler alert and ruin the whole movie ending for you. Brown and black people are globally the majority and have been the majority this entire time.
Exactly.
Okay?
Exactly.
Look at the size of China. Look at the size of India. Look at the size of Africa. Look at the numbers in Mexico. And that's even though a couple of years into the conquistadores being here, they murdered 22 million people, like that. Okay? With their plagues.
Yep.
Cochinos. You know? So that was a foregone conclusion that white people were becoming the minority. I've been in the Midwest, particularly here in the North Dakota, Minnesota area for around 20 years.
Yep. Couple censuses.
Right? And couple censuses. And every year, what I hear from the majority white population in this area is, everyone's leaving town. White people aren't having children. All of the white people are dying. Nobody is replacing them. Is that my fault? Is that the Mexican people's fault? Because, in this video, they're talking about the fear that goes behind replacement theory. The fear is that white people are being replaced by Mexicans. Indigenous people have always been here. Indigenous people didn't arrive on the Mayflower. We didn't come over on a boat. We didn't come through Ellis Island. We have been crossing these borders and using these trade routes. In fact, as an archaeologist that you are, one of your colleagues found corn from my people in Mexico here in North Dakota.
Really? In Enderlin, North Dakota. It was 800 AD. I mean, you're talking 700 years before Europeans even were on the eastern shores of the continent here. And so there was corn agriculture that was spreading and growing and being, figured out how to grow in different places for, thousands of years. And so that was a big archaeological find for my professor at MSUM, Mike McClovick. And, it just shows the history of the peoples that were on this continent.
So Mike McClovick and you, Duke, who are no longer a teenager, at least we can say that.
That's right.
Y'all have been around a good amount of time to know the Mexican population, which in your constitution, in your congressional hearings, in your Supreme Court decisions, you titled as Indians, because we are indigenous to this continent.
Yep.
We are First Nations people. We have always been here. So the Schrodinger's Jew reference in this TikTok video we just watched is the perception that somehow Jews are perceived by anti-Semites in this country as both being all-encompassing globalists, they'll use that word, in charge of everything, and at the same time inferior racially, intelligence-wise, and morally to the other white people, right? I would say that the same is true of Mexicans who are indigenous, because you hear the demonization of Mexicans as taking your jobs, taking the women, these morally questionable, they're rapists, said Trump. They're criminals. They're here illegally, even though, as I said, originally we were the first people on this continent. And then at the same time, we are seen as people that don't have the capacity to be educated. Most recently, Governor Abbott in Texas is arguing that migrant children shouldn't be educated, that migrant children shouldn't receive baby formula because there's a shortage. So those children are not children.
Yeah.
They're not humans. They're not humans that should be cared for, even though they're in the custody of the United States government.
And they're people.
Right? But so we have this dichotomy of this angry feeling about people that are already here on the continent and people that are brought here by corporations, American corporations, to work in agriculture and in the service industries and in your meat packing plants as long as I have been alive. As long as I have been alive, I have been either translating for or doing media coverage of immigrants brought here illegally, sometimes trafficked across state lines, across country lines by companies, multi-million-dollar companies that traffic these people, that enslave these people, and I mean enslave. I mean keep them confined, do not allow them to leave, hold their passports, hold their documents, identification documents, so that they cannot leave the grounds from where they are working. Remember the people from India that were here, the Cast 23? Remember the people that were deported after they picked the crops, the onions here in North Dakota?
Exactly.
Remember all of the people from the meat packing plants? Remember Food Inc. and the coverage we did about how those meat packing and the Tyson Foods, they have an ongoing agreement with our federal government, with our immigration authorities, so that they come and collect a number of undocumented people so that they're following the law, wink, wink. But at the same time, they don't take enough people to decrease production for any of the companies that might be affected. The government demonizes the immigrants that are brought here, enticed, paid, lied to, and trafficked by American corporations, and does nothing to the criminal corporations and their criminal behavior. Trafficking people, enslaving people, abusing, oppressing people, and in many cases, even sex trafficking and raping them and murdering them. This has been documented throughout the history of this country. It hasn't stopped. It's ongoing today. But we want to talk about the people, the immigrants themselves. We want to demonize and criminalize them above the people that are bringing them here, enticing them to come here.
Exactly.
That's a conversation that needs to be had, okay? Because if we're going to be talking about this replacement theory, you need to go after Tyson.
Yep.
You need to go after these meat packing plants. You need to go after the hotel chains. You need to go after the people like Trump Towers and Mar-a-Lago. All of these people bringing in, enticing, paying people who they know are undocumented to work at their corporations and businesses, because they all do it without any punishment. You want to know who's replacing you? It's McDonald's. It's McDonald's Corporation. It's Target. It's Walmart. You don't want to know who's replacing you? It's Amazon. It's Elon Musk. Elon Musk is using slave labor in China and in other countries. They're the companies that are outsourcing your jobs and hiring undocumented and BIPOC people to do the jobs that white people are complaining they should have. Okay?
Yep.
Let's look at the next TikTok. This one is by Melissa. Short green, Melissa of the Fearless Queen Mel. Let's go. No, this is not Melissa. We had Abby first. That was the one that we just saw. We're going to watch Melissa now.
Here's Melissa.
It never fails. Every video I make, there is a constant stream of butthurt white women and sometimes white men in my comment section saying that I'm stirring up racism because I'm holding us to account. When here is the reality. Who raised Peyton? Who raised him? Was it black people that raised him? No, it wasn't. This is who raised him. This is his mother and his father. Now, what do you notice about Becky? Exactly. It is white women who are raising these white terrorists. We raise them, we create them, we rear them, and we want to pretend like we don't have any idea where they got their ideologies from. So how was it, you tell me, who raised him with these ideologies? And giving them credit, saying that they didn't raise him with these ideologies, and that's giving a lot of credit where none is due. Why did they not recognize this pattern, and what the hell did they do about it to stop it? These deaths lie on the hands of his parents just as much as they do on him. And that is being raised by white parents. This is why I call us to account. This is the reason that I call us on our own shit. Because it is us who is birthing them. It is us who is raising them. It's us who is rearing them. It's us who is overlooking all of these red flags that are enough to create an entire field of red flags. It is us. It is us. It's always been us. Racism starts with us and racism will end with us. It is our job to dismantle racism because it was us who first assembled racism. I don't care if that makes you angry. I don't care if you're in my comment section telling me that I'm a race traitor or whatever you want to say. No, I'm just a decent human being who says that it is time that we own our shit and we realize that it is us who is raising them. It is us who is creating these monsters. So what the hell are you going to do about it? Because I'll tell you, as a mother of 3 sons, I will die before I raise one of these. And they know that. Do your kids know that? What are you doing to stop this cycle with your beautiful babies? It creates this toxic environment. The only way to undo this is to teach them true history, to teach them our role in history and in racism and all the atrocities that we've faced over, that we've caused people of color, Black, brown, and indigenous throughout the history of our nation. And we have to create them to be anti-racist. It's not enough just to not be racist. You have to be anti-racist. No free passes for anybody ever, anywhere. I don't care if that's your pastor. I don't care if that's your son's coach. I don't care if it's your cousin, your mother, your father, your aunt, your uncle, your brother. I don't give a damn. Whoever it is that is spouting these ideologies and these racist rhetoric, you have to call them to account.
Okay, now that was Melissa Short Green. If you're just tuning in, we are learning CRT at TikTok University. We don't need schools. We don't need colleges. We can learn what we want, how we want. And Melissa has got a very controversial message here.
Oh, yeah.
She's got a controversial message for the white people and the white mothers. And she is saying something that a lot of white people are angry about. A lot of folks are upset about what at the Fearless Queen Mel on TikTok is saying. But isn't this the same thing that we hear every time a black, brown, or Asian person commits a hate crime? We say, we look at the family, we look at the parents, and we say, what were these people taught? What absence? What was missing from their lives? Did the dad go away? Was he in jail? Mm-hmm. Why did these children end up? The culture. Was it the hip hop that they were listening to that made them do these horrible things? Was it those awful video games? Was it that horrible rap culture of calling the women bitches and hoes? Is that what made these people commit crimes and do horrible things? I think it's only fair that we ask the same question of the white folks raising these mass murderers, these school shooters,
exactly.
This is happening every day, folks. Open your eyes. Wake up. Open your eyes. It comes from somewhere. Melissa's right about that. It does come from somewhere. And she, as a white woman, all on her own, has deduced, has come to a moment of clarity and thought the reason why this is because she has control over whether or not she raises children like that. And as she said at the end of that, she's not going to let that happen. She has control, and she's taking control.
Yeah.
As a white woman, she's like, I'm not going to let this country, this media, this educational system, what have you, dictate how my children are going to be raised and what they're going to learn about this world. What am I seeing in this world that is churning out this daily mass shootings of white people by white people, white kids, right? White Kyle Rittenhouse is going out and feeling like they're the vigilantes that got to go and shoot up people of color or people of color causes. Why is that? Well, Melissa Short Green says it's because we haven't learned enough about our history. I agree. Yeah. I think that we will be doomed to repeat this history over and over again unless we learn it. And the horrible things that we are seeing visited upon Buffalo and upon California, the horrible mass shootings, the kinds of horrible situations where people are dying in these domestic terrorist attacks, which are happening more and more frequently in our country, is that we have to make a decision whether we're going to stick our heads in the sand, bury our heads in the sand, and pretend that this has no relation to everything that we have done to indigenous, black, and brown people in this country, that would raise people, white people, that have these murderous tendencies. And she is saying to you that if you continue to remain willfully ignorant and teach your kids color blindness and whitewashed history, you're going to be churning out more of these domestic terrorists. You're going to be churning out more Dylan Roofs, more Kyle Rittenhouses. And if that's what you want for your country, that's on you. If you want to hear more about what Melissa Short Green has on her TikTok channel at The Fearless Queen Mel, you can follow her there. You can also go check out her link tree by going to her TikTok page. And if you want to send her support, monetary or otherwise, you can message her at her P.O. Box at 872, that's the P.O. Box, in Cedar Bluffs, Virginia, 24609. Now, what I wanted to share with you about these videos that I find interesting is how this translates into Mexican history that we have not learned about, which I think is very important to understanding what is happening today. One thing a lot of people ask me about as a Mexican American is why my kids don't speak Spanish, or why certain people in my family speak not as good Spanish as I do, or poor Spanish. And this is true for a lot of Mexicans, even those that are second generation, third generation, because of a lot of different reasons. But here in this Cadena Collective, TikTok Cadena Collective video is the explanation for why many people that migrated and settled in this region, Fargo-Moorhead area, from Crystal City, Texas, why they don't speak the language. And in particular, they're going to refer to a term that is kind of a trend right now in Mexican TikTok and Mexican social media, and it's called no sabo. For the Mexican Americans out there that are listening to me, that know about this trend, it's a trend on TikTok where Mexican people that are Spanish speakers sort of make fun of what they call no sabo kids, that non-knowing, and they even say no sabo instead of no sé. To say I don't know is to say no sé. Okay, here's your Spanish words of the day.
Yeah.
No sé means I don't know. And when people that are Spanish speaking speak to their children, nephews, cousins, whatever, that are the younger generation that didn't learn the Spanish, in Spanish, they say no sabo instead of no sé, because they don't speak enough Spanish to even say I don't know. So that they use the wrong tense of the word to know, and they say sabo, which is kind of a made up word. But the point of that is that it's not their fault that they didn't get to learn Spanish. And here is one of the reasons why the people from Crystal City don't know Spanish.
The topic of being a no sabo kid and why some Latinos don't speak Spanish is oftentimes a controversial one. Let's look at what happened in a small town called Crystal City in Texas in 1969 to understand why some Latinos don't speak Spanish. The story is about a group of Mexican American students who decided to walk out to demand their rights, to fight discrimination, and to request that they have the same resources as their white peers. Oftentimes, they were not able or allowed to speak Spanish. They could not eat their Mexican food, and they could not partake in many school activities. In fact, there was an actual rule that only one Mexican cheerleader was allowed on the team. And because Crystal City was an agricultural town, Mexican Americans were actually discouraged from attending college as well. And so oftentimes they would return to the fields to work alongside their parents and their family without an opportunity for economic mobility. However, in 1969, under the leadership of Jose Angel Gutierrez, who was a student who had left Crystal City, gone to college, studied civil rights movement, had come back and inspired his peers to protest and do walkouts. They ended up shifting the narratives of the Crystal City School District, allowing for these ridiculous rules against Mexican Americans to be removed. Additionally, it inspired many parents and students to run for office all across Texas, and it included many other walkouts that changed narratives across the state. So while it might be difficult to understand why some Latinos don't speak Spanish, like in the case of Crystal City, there have been institutional barriers that have not allowed generations and generations to learn their native tongue. This is a reminder that we are not a monolith. We don't look the same. We don't sound the same. We have very different experiences across the board. And it's also a reminder that our starting line as a community is very different from our white peers.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And let me just share a story with you because my children don't speak Spanish. And I was educated to speak Spanish in my home to my parents as a sign of respect, but also so I could communicate with my grandparents, with my aunts and uncles. And my father also made it a point to take me back to Mexico each year. And I lived in Mexico from the age of 1 through around 5. Plus, I went back and lived in Mexico and studied in Mexico and went to private schools and had tutors and things like that because my parents wanted me to be educated, both from the perspective of Mexico and from the perspective of the United States. And they wanted me to be fluent in both languages, and I did do that. In fact, I was able to start a translating corporation called Trans Inc. when I was just 22 years old. So you can imagine for me, it was a very important thing to raise my children speaking Spanish. And in my home, I made sure that my kids only spoke Spanish. Flash forward to when I'm putting my kids in daycare and in preschool. And when my oldest child was in preschool, I was working for social services. And my child is autistic. At the time, even though I had already learned about autism because I babysat autistic kids and I knew other autistic children, I knew the traits of autism, and I thought that my child was exhibiting those traits. Also, because I was in Child Protective Services and I provided therapy support to therapists for children that had disabilities or behavioral issues, I also learned to identify milestones of development and was tracking that in all of my clients. So I could definitely tell that something was different about my child. And so I went to doctors and tried to get a diagnosis. Unfortunately, as we are still learning about this mental disability today, mostly white male boys were being diagnosed with autism. And there's a variety of reasons for that. It is now more prevalent that non-white and non-male people are being diagnosed with autism all the time. But at the time, it was a very rare thing to even be able to get a diagnosis. And my child was not able to get a diagnosis for many years, not until they were 12. So when they were entering the preschool system and they were pretty much nonverbal and having a difficult time in social settings, again, because of the autism, the teachers decided that it was due to the fact that I was only speaking Spanish at home and that my child's learning of Spanish was actually giving them a developmental disadvantage in learning and interacting socially. And therefore, they said that my speaking only Spanish in the home was a form of child abuse and neglect, and that they were going to forward my case to Child Protective Services if I didn't start speaking English in the home to my child.
Wow.
Yeah.
This last TikToker talked about Crystal City, and in this area, a lot of people from Crystal City, from the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, the migrant stream for sugar beet. I mean, here's a corporation bringing in immigrants and new Americans and Mexican people all the way up to Morehead, almost to Canada, to hoe their sugar beets and to do the industry so they could make their sugar money, which they still do until Roundup came up with and Monsanto came up with the seed that would be weed resistant, and then they just told people there's no more work up here. Generations of people moved here. Generations of people settled in western Minnesota, eastern North Dakota, and retaining the culture is difficult in this high northern land, and
Right.
and we don't have that acceptance. Still don't. There's probably more now than there ever was, but it's not nearly enough. And people lost their culture. Remember the 800 A.D. corn found in Enderlin, North Dakota, ancient site, part of a trade route, part of migration. These borders have created the inability for people to migrate. There used to be bison that migrated from north to south in this country. It would cover the horizon every spring. They would go across the Red River and they'd break through the ice and make a bridge of dead bison for the other bison to cross.
Wow.
Now they're in cages and just little spots around North Dakota, Minnesota, other parts of the country. And some farmers grow them and grind them up for your meat. I mean, that's what happened to those animals. The same thing has happened to the people.
One of the things that's really important about learning our history is that if you don't know your history, a charlatan, a liar, a fraud can come and lie to you about who you are and what your interests are in this world and get you to vote against your interests, get you to vote against your own kids, get you to vote against your own family, against your own community, against yourself, to do yourself harm, to do harm within your community. And what that looks like is that you have an epidemic of serial killers and mass murderers is in this country who are all white males for the most part. That's not racism. That's not discrimination. That's not even prejudice. Those are facts.
Exactly.
And I'm just stating the facts.
Exactly.
What percentage of serial killers in America, which, by the way, the phenomenon of serial killers does not only exist in the United States, but it is the most prevalent in the United States. They don't have a mass serial murderer problem in other countries the way we do here. It's a special kind of mass murdery here in America. And in America, what percentage of serial killers are white males? You want to guess?
I'd say 95%.
That's a lot. That's a lot, dude. That's exaggerated even for you.
What was a guess?
Well, what percentage of the population are black people or Latinos or Asian people?
I don't know.
It's less than 30.
Yep.
Okay?
Okay.
So, do blacks, Asians, and Latinos make up 10%, 20%, 30% of the population of serial murderers?
Nope. How many?
Serial killers that are white and male are 67%.
Okay.
67%, almost 70%
Almost.
of all of the serial killers in the
yeah.
United States are white males.
It's almost 2/3.
And if you look up the number of school shooters, you're going to find that it's closer to the 90%.
And here's a piece of advice for all the white people out there and people of color. I'm not giving people of color advice, but I will to the white people that when we talk about race, we talk about these things, you feel that cringe inside. You don't want to talk about it. You don't want to hear it. You want to think of things like, you're race baiting, or, that's not true, and all these sorts of things. You got to get in touch with your own supremacy, because that's what you're protecting when you have that sort of reaction, that you can't listen to facts. Things that are on paper that show 67% of serial killers are white people. And you get cringy and it's like, wait, there's a black person who was a serial killer, and you want to deflect it. You need to hang with that uncomfortability if you're going to undo it. If you're going to actually deal with the racism and the supremacy that you've been brought up with and that what you uphold.
More importantly, if you do not want to perpetuate that, if we have a saying in Mexico. Lo que no has de poder ver, en tu casa lo has de tener. Let me say that again. Lo que no has de poder ver, en tu casa lo has de tener. What that translates into is, what you cannot stand to look at will end up inside of your house. And what this means is, the thing that you fear the most, you're going to attract it to yourself. The thing that you are most afraid of, if the thing that you are most afraid of is homosexuals, your child will be a homosexual. Mm-hmm. If the thing that you're most afraid of is black people, your grandchild is going to be black. If the thing that you are most afraid of is that your daughter is going to be marrying a Mexican, your daughter is going to have Mexican grandbabies for you. Mm-hmm. The thing that you cannot stand to see will end up in your house. The reality here is that a lot of the backlash in this country, in America, against people of color or against people lifting themselves up, trying to gain equality, just trying to live, work, study, and survive in America, has been one where white supremacists, white people espousing a sense of superiority over other races, and that's what I'm labeling as a white supremacist. Mm-hmm. You don't have to be a card-carrying Klan member, okay? You don't have to be walking around in a robe and a white hat. You can be a person that feels and says and acts on that feeling that as a white person, they are superior to other races. And whether that means that they won't hire, that they won't date, that they will mistreat, abuse, call the cops on people that they see as inferior to them. That's what white supremacy looks like. It's not just using the N-word. It's denying baby formula to a baby because they're black or brown and undocumented. It's deciding that Mexican kids that are undocumented don't deserve to know how to read or write. We did that during slavery. That's old. It's old and racist. It doesn't mean that you have to use a racial slur, or that you have to join a hate group and shave your head and hang a noose on a tree. That's not the modern way that you oppress and abuse people. And we have been doing the same thing over and over again. And as soon as we see the population of brown or black or Asian people doing well, running a business, having a town, doing the thing, the white supremacist that feels that they are superior to those folks, they get angry. They get mad. They burn down the town. They steal the property of the brown and black people. They steal the children of brown and black people. They take the labor of brown and black people and say, this should be mine. This is my due. Black and brown people can't have nothing unless a white person already has 3 of them. That's how the white supremacist thinks. And it's been going on and on and on. Let me take you back, because right now, a lot of the discussion around abortion rights and Roe v. Wade being overturned are that everybody can save these babies and we just adopt them out. Let's just adopt them out. Let's not look at the adoption industry, billion-dollar business that it is in America. Let's not analyze the racist, abusive, rapey, white supremacist, murdering kids operation that is CPS and the foster care system in America. Let's not look at those. Let's just make the women have the babies, and then we can send them out for adoption. Because why? Because white people adopt babies so much? Because Americans adopt babies so much? Because black and brown folks are allowed to foster kids, white kids? Because brown and black folks and gay people are allowed to adopt white kids? No, sir. That is not what is going on here in America. It has never been going on here in America. Only 1%. Well, I'm going to be generous. Let's go all the way up to 3. It's only about 2%. But it's actually a little bit over 1%. But I'm just going to throw out a generous 3%. Only 3% of Americans actually adopt children. And if you haven't been living under a rock and are listening to those grown adoptees today talking about what a hellscape they lived through, especially those black and brown and Asian kids that were adopted by white supremacist folks and families, then we would know adoption is not all it's cracked up to be. It's not the solution for a bunch of unwanted pregnancies. It's not the solution for anything. And in fact, we have a history of denying certain folks the right to adopt, especially white children, and taking the children of black and brown and Asian people away from their parents and putting them into Catholic schools, boarding schools, migrant schools, places, foster care, adoption, places where they go to be abused, raped, and killed, and uneducated. Because they take away their traditions, they take away their language, they are uneducating them. They're taking away everything that makes them Mexican, that makes them Asian, that makes them black, that gives them a connection, a tether, a root to their own ancestry, to their own identity, and whitewashes it and assimilates them into a white world that they really don't have any connection to. It has been disastrous for those adoptees. And let me show you a little history here on TikTok University about this. Let me tell you the story of the abduction, the kidnapping, and trafficking of 40 white Irish orphan children in the 21st century in Clifton, Arizona.
20th century.
20th century in Clifton, Arizona. Now, this article came out in 2022, just at the beginning of the year in January. But they're looking at the adoption by Mexican families, Mexican Catholic, Mexican American families in the United States and Arizona as early as the 20th century. We have in this picture here that you see if you're watching us on social media is of Old Chase Creek. This is in the area of Clifton, Arizona, and their sister city, which was nearby in the town of, I can't remember what the name is. I'll come on it here in a minute. But this picture shows you what the town looked like at the time. It was a mining town. Okay, a copper mining town in Clifton. And over 400 angry vigilantes assembled on a stormy October evening in the year 1904 in eastern Arizona in this copper mining town of Clifton, threatening Catholic priests and 3 nuns. 3 nuns. So before the mob could lynch the religious workers, cooler heads were allowed to prevail and they were allowed to flee. What was their crime? They were placing Mexican parents with adopted Irish children. They were 40 light-skinned, fair-haired Irish kids that were brought to Clifton on an orphan train that had just arrived from New York at Grand Central Station. Now, you have to understand what was happening at this time. White residents in Clifton objected to race mixing, so they saw the fact that white children were placed in the homes of Indians, essentially Mexicans, which they saw as indios, that this was putting children of the civilized white people with the savages. So they felt they needed to go and rescue them. And they believed that just putting a white child, a white skin and white ancestry into the home of an indigenous Mexican family, that in itself would be child abuse. Okay? Never mind that these were all Mexican Americans, meaning they were American citizens who had homes, who had a stable home that was vetted by the Catholic Church for these placements. Never mind that. The white people saw any person of my skin color and heritage as being savages, right? That shouldn't have children themselves. They were taking away our kids. And the Catholic Church was taking away indigenous kids and putting them in migrant schools and putting them in
Indian schools,
right? So in this particular town, and by the way, this mob that was brought together was started by a group of white women. The white women were themselves the catalysts behind this violent drama, which ended up attracting nationwide attention. Let me show you a photo of Mae Wright Simpson, who was one of the white women who kidnapped some of these orphans, these 40 orphans from the Catholic Church in 1906. Here she is pictured with two of the orphans that were taken from the Mexican families who had originally adopted them. Her own adopted daughter at the top, and her adopted niece at the bottom. So, the white women got nationwide attention for stirring up a mob to go and take these children, kidnap these children from their adoptive parents. The fate of these orphans actually went all the way to the Supreme Court of the United States in a tragic story that reveals how the racist perceptions of Irish people at the time exacerbated the racial fault lines in territorial Arizona in this mining town. At the turn of the century, in Greater Clifton, which is also includes the sister city of Morenci, that's the other city I was looking for earlier.
Okay.
It was labeled the toughest town in the territory. So this is like Wild Wild West vibes where people kind of basically do whatever the hell they want, you know? The racial hierarchy in the mining camps in this town dictated that white people were the overseers and the Mexicans were doing all of the hard labor, the dangerous labor, the labor that would get you killed, while the white men were the overseers of everything, right? They're the ones that had the supervisory positions, the skilled positions, the better paying and less dangerous positions. But the Mexican Roman Catholics in Clifton went to the Catholic Church, which was the Sacred Heart Catholic Church, led by Father Constant Mandan. And inspired by this pulp fiction novel at the time called Bandits of Arizona, the French-born priest had recently come to the U.S. and had been assigned to this parish and got the grand idea that he was going to take these orphans that were going to be sent to him. He was contacted by an orphanage called the Foundling Hospital, which was a Catholic institution operating out of New York City. And they told him they had all of these orphans that they needed to place in homes, and all these kids were between the ages of 2 and 6. 40 orphans.
And they were Irish, right?
And listen, this was an initiative that was going on throughout the country.
Okay.
Many of these orphans were given up by single white women that were too poor to care for them. Remember that this is in 1845, the Irish potato famine sent millions of people, hundreds of thousands of people, immigrating from Ireland to the United States, particularly to New York. And those people did not have the means, many times, to raise or feed children. So they gave them up to orphanages. This priest, Mandan, found many willing families in his parish who were Mexican Americans, which he vetted as having moral and stable homes and who would raise the children as Catholics. Because remember, this is a Catholic hospital, a Catholic church, a Catholic priest. And in this time, Mexican American Catholics in this church that were being led by this priest, they wanted to adopt children. Many of them didn't have children of their own, and they wanted to please the church. They wanted to please the priest. And some of them, as a writer named Linda Gordon, author of the book, The Great Arizona Orphan Abduction of 1999, she believed that many of these Mexican American families were interested in adopting a white child because it would help them to assimilate into America even more. The Irish were considered racially inferior in New York. They weren't seen as white in New York, but in Clifton, they were white. And anybody who wasn't Mexican or Chinese was white in Clifton. So the Clifton adoptions were part of this nationwide program that was connecting orphans with homes throughout the country. And it was all done through the Catholic Church, so they were trying to find Catholic foster homes or adoption homes for the children. Now, at the same time, the Protestant Church had their own startup orphan business going that was led by Charles Owen Brace, and they were specifically placing Irish orphans in non-Catholic homes. Now, anybody that knows anything about Ireland knows there's a lot of Irish people of Catholic descent. So you can imagine that for other people that were Irish in this country, or even other Catholics, they would see placing Irish children, who mostly come from a Catholic background, in non-Catholic homes as detrimental to the upbringing of those children. Whatever your religious background is, at this time, it was very common for the Catholic Church to seek out Catholic homes to be placed, to put children in. And between the years of 1854, the years 1854 and 1929, an estimated 200,000 homeless, abandoned, or orphaned children were placed by Eastern charity institutions, orphanages, all throughout the U.S. and Canada in what became known as the Orphan Train Movement.
Wow.
Arizona State historian Marshall Trimble says this was happening all throughout the U.S. and Canada, and kids were being transported through trains with nannies and nurses and priests. And the orphans were dressed in their best clothes with coated ribbons. And you can look at a black and white picture here of some of the children that were being put onto the trains and sent out to their predetermined destinations where homes of Catholics were going to be adopting these little toddlers. And of course, the Clifton adoptions went off course very soon after this trainload of kids arrived. At the priest's home, Mandan is his last name, at the priest's home, 16 children that were being adopted were collected by their Mexican adoptee moms. And this was witnessed by many local white Protestant women who, upon witnessing the joyous occasion, became enraged. And this is a direct quote here. Some of the Anglo women wanted to adopt because they were barren, childless. Many more of them resented the fact that they had been passed over. They hadn't been chosen as potential adoptees, and the Catholic Mexicans were given favoritism in these adoptions. And all of these, of course, were the racist assumptions that they were making about their entitlement to these white babies. And so Mandan, the priest, who thought that this was going to help unite the church and make him look good to the mucky mucks up, the superiors above him, he ended up having to get on a train and he got run out of town on a rail, literally, because it was not taken well. The next morning, after the mothers came and picked up the first 16 orphans, Catholic staff took the remaining 24 orphans to the Holy Cross Church in Morenci, the sister city, and distributed them to their predetermined Mexican adoptee Catholic families. Just hours after this, a furious crowd of over 400 people gathered in, pressuring Mandan to go and pick up all of those children from those Mexican Indian homes or else. And this mob of people assembled to collect these children. And the Catholic staff, they didn't know what to do. So in that moment, in their fear, they handed over some of the children, the orphan children, to the white mob. Like, they just straight up, they were like these murderous mob, people making demands. They just handed over children to them to appease them. But did that appease them? Nope. They were still on the rampage. So an even more violent event transpired later that evening in Clifton, where a posse of about 25 people, armed and dangerous vigilantes, went and kidnapped 16 orphans out of their new homes. They went with guns in hand and went to the houses of Mexican Catholic American families and pointed guns at them and said, "Give us your children." One of the fathers that protested was told by a posse leader shoving a gun in his ribs, "Here's your court order," when asked on what authority he was coming to steal, to kidnap one of these children from their homes. Imagine a family goes through the process of being vetted for an adoption and having a home check to make sure that you're a good Catholic family with good moral standing, that you have a stable home, good jobs, that you can take care of these kids, and then having a racist mob show up and take your child at gunpoint. That's what happened here.
Wow.
And so this was all written about in a book. When an adoptive father protested, I told you that the posse leader shoved a gun. And the book is called North from Mexico. In 1949, that book was written by Carrie McWilliams, if you want to look into this story a little bit more. But then what happened is there was a free-for-all to get the children and distribute them among the people in this angry mob. They were like literally trying to kidnap the children from each other, fighting over the kidnapped children that they just took from these Mexican Catholics' homes at gunpoint. Then they started fighting each other for these kids.
Wow.
Literally like they were at an auction grabbing things, like they were at Black Friday getting a big screen TV. That's what it was like. Mandan, the priest, who was the scapegoat of this whole conflict, fled for his life on a train, the very next train he could get on, leaving behind 7 nuns and the nurses / caretakers of these orphaned children to fend for themselves.
Wow.
Armed men and angry racist women that invaded the hotel room of the nuns and accused them of being sex traffickers and child and slave traders. Does that sound familiar to anybody?
Mm-hmm.
The next day, the remainder of the Catholic staff managed to leave New York, go back to New York with 21 of the children so that they could put them in homes that they chose, that they vetted, instead of having them kidnapped by white racist people.
Exactly.
But the craziest part of this story, okay? The craziest part of the story is that legal proceedings initiated by the Foundling Hospital, who had taken in these orphans, to reclaim some of these children that were kidnapped and trafficked by the white racists in Clifton, resulted in the Arizona Supreme Court ruling that the white kidnappers were permitted to keep the children that they stole. Can you believe that, Duke?
I believe it.
The white kidnappers of the children were allowed to keep the children that they stole. The U.S. Supreme Court later justified the kidnappings and giving of those kidnapped children to their white abductors on the grounds that, quote unquote, a white Caucasian child abandoned to the keeping of a Mexican Indian who is, by reason of his race, mode of living, habits, and education, unfit to have the custody, care, and education of a child. Let me read that to you again. The Supreme Court ruled that a white child, Caucasian child, being abandoned to the keeping of a Mexican Indian who is, by reason of his race, mode of living, habits, and education, unfit to have the custody, care, and education of a child. They ruled that people of my heritage and skin color, because of our skin color, because of our mode of living, our traditions, our habits, and our education, we are unfit to care for children. And let me just follow up with this question. How many black people do you know have taken in and adopted or fostered white kids that have been abandoned, abused, and uncared for? That have been the result of an unwanted pregnancy. How many Mexicans do you see allowed to adopt? How many gay people? I could go on and on. If you can find a large number of people of color that have been allowed to adopt and care for any kids, our own kids, brown and black kids, Asian kids, gay kids, trans kids. When are people of color allowed to take care of kids? They're not. Historically, they've had their children taken away from them. And when, in this occasion, they were given the right, vetted by a Catholic adoption institution to care for these children, they had them kidnapped by white racist women, and the Supreme Court upheld that kidnapping was okay because Mexican Indians were not fit to have the custody or care or education of a white Caucasian child. Mm-hmm. This is a tragic part of history, of American history specifically, that we need to know. And a historian added that, in theory, these children were lucky to be adopted by sympathetic Mexican Catholics who welcomed them, rather than as many adoptions in America were done back in the day as laborers, as free laborers, as servants, essentially as slaves. That's how most of the adoptions of the time were greeted. Oh, you're getting a free pair of hands to work at your house. That was the plight of most orphans. And these children, these particular orphaned Irish kids were really in a position of great luck to be taken in by sympathetic Catholic Mexicans who did not want them to be coming into their homes as servants or laborers, but as children of their family. However, the idea of white children being raised by Mexican children upset the racist white women of Clifton so much and roused their racist husbands to come and quote unquote rescue these children from those homes, those loving homes. Ironically, although New Yorkers did not regard Irish as white people at the time, Arizona did. And they missed an opportunity to go into those nice homes because of racism.
Wow.
We still have that problem today. So when someone tells you that the solution to Roe v. Wade is adoption, tell them you know a story about history that would tend to disparage that view. This is that story. Thanks for coming to CRT Education and TikTok University. Continue to educate yourselves. We will not be held back by the bans in the states like Florida. We will not be held back by ignorant and racist and white supremacist parents in America that say that their children aren't going to learn about history, that they're going to remain willfully ignorant about the racism and the chattel slavery that is unique to this country and this country alone in the world. And that we have to learn so that we don't end up putting our kids through the same thing and revisiting that history and reliving that history again and again. We don't have to do it. We can get educated. You can join us on A Mexican Crossing Line with your hosts, Cindy Gomez-Schempp
and Duke Gomez-Schempp.
And keep learning about CRT and educating yourselves and your kids as much as you want. So check out all of those accounts of all of these great TikTok users and join us here next time. Thank you and have a great evening.